Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Ma ba'd, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, we commenced last week with Bab Salat al-Jama'ah, the chapter pertaining to Salat in congregation. And now, when he spoke about some of its rulings, he mentions who is most worthy of imamah. Imamah as in who is most worthy of leading the salah. Now what he mentions in this chapter is only in the case that people have argued or disagreed over who should be imam. Because we keep the principle that the imam of the masjid, the appointed imam, no one can supersede him. If a masjid has an imam, then we can't come and say to someone else, you lead the salah. And we took last lesson that if someone does do that, then what do we say is the ruling? If there is an imam, appointed imam in the masjid, and someone leads instead of him, what happens to the salah? The salah becomes invalid unless he has given permission. So what he mentions here is in the case that we do not have an imam who is appointed in the masjid. So for example, we're in a gathering and we want to decide who is going to lead the salah, then this is what we go off. He says, Al-aqra'u al-alimu fiqha salatihi awla min al-afqah. He says, number one, the first is al-aqra', the person with the better recitation, and we're going to speak about what that is. And he says, al-alimu fiqha salatihi, the one who has knowledge of the fiqh of salah, the rulings pertaining to the salah. And when we say rulings pertaining to the salah, he knows the arkan, the pillars that we mentioned before. And he knows the wajibat, the compulsory actions. And he knows the sunan. And if he makes a mistake, he knows how to fix that mistake. That is the person who knows the rulings regarding to salah. So in first place, they put the one who has a good recitation with knowledge of the fiqh of salah. And they say that this person is more worthy than leading than someone who is more knowledgeable but doesn't have a good recitation. What do they mean by al-aqra'? What is al-aqra'? Al-aqra', meaning having recitation that is good, is it better tajweed or is it more memorization? Tajweed. Combination of both. The Hanbali, they say that al-aqra' is the one with the better tajweed. Better tajweed is is given precedence over the one who memorizes more but doesn't have good tajweed. And when we speak about tajweed, first of all, his pronunciation of the huruf is good. And the second, we say that he doesn't make a mistake that changes the meaning. And third is that he follows the rules and the ahkam of tajweed. When it comes to mad, and it comes to idgham, and it comes to ikhfa, he follows those rules. So al-aqra' for the Hanabila is the one with the better tajweed, not the one with more memorization. However, if we have someone who's memorized the whole Quran and has tajweed, with someone who hasn't memorized the whole Quran with good tajweed, who do we put first? The one who has more Quran. And that is because the Prophet ﷺ said, وَلْيَأُمَّكُمْ أَقْرَأُكُمْ لِكِتَابِ اللَّهِ, meaning the person who should lead your salah is the one who is better at reciting the Quran. And then he doesn't mention the rest of the order. The mu'allif of Zad Mustaqni', he says, al-awla bil-imamati al-aqra'. In Zad Mustaqni' he mentions that the first is al-aqra', the one who has better recitation. And then he says, thumma al-afqah, the one, if we don't have someone with good recitation, then we say, as in tajweed, then we move on to the most knowledgeable. And we don't mean the knowledge of salah, he has good knowledge in terms of Islam in general. And then after al-afqah, they say al-asan, the eldest of the two. So let's say we have two are equal in good recitation, they're equal in knowledge, we go for the eldest of the two. Some scholars, they put before that al-aqdam islaman, the one who entered Islam before, or the one who done hijrah before. And the asan, the person being elder, they said because the Prophet ﷺ, when some of the Sahaba came together and they entered Islam at the same time, he said to them, وَلْيَأُمَّكُمْ أَكْبَرُكُمَا. And then after al-asan, they say al-ashraf, meaning the one with the most noble lineage. And what's the most noble lineage for us when we say al-ashraf? How do we decide? Based off what? Because if we don't have a metric, everyone's going to say I'm al-ashraf. I'm the one with the most noble lineage. So what's the most noble lineage that we have? Huh? Higher than that. From within Quraysh we have Ahl al-Bayt, Bani Hashim. Bani Hashim, which are the family and the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ, they are the most noble in lineage. That is the most noble lineage. Then after Bani Hashim, we say Quraysh in general. Quraysh. Then after Quraysh, what's after Quraysh? No. So they say first Banu Hashim, which are the Prophet ﷺ's lineage. Then they say Quraysh. And the rest of Quraysh are all equal. And then they say Arabs. And Arabs again, they're all equal. So there's no Arab who's more noble of a lineage than another. And then they say non-Arabs. So we have two people. One of them is from Bani Hashim. The other is from Quraysh. Listen to what I'm saying. One of them is from Bani Hashim. The other one is from Quraysh. The one who's from Quraysh has better Quran recitation. Which one goes first? Huh? Listen to me properly. We have two people. One is from Bani Hashim, from the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ. The other one is just from Quraysh. But he has better Quran recitation than the other one. The one from Quraysh. Because the first metric we look at is who has a better recitation. Then we move on to who has better knowledge. Then we move on to the eldest. Then we move on to lineage. So lineage is a thing when they're equal in all the three before. Yeah? Then after lineage they say al-atqa, the one who is most God-fearing. And then after al-atqa they say, if they're still the same, then they say we do a qur'ah. You know qur'ah? You put names in a hat and you pick one out. These people, they argued till the end. They went from beginning, who knows more Quran? Me. No, they're equal. Then they moved on until Al-Qur'an. But like we said, if the Imam of the Masjid, appointed Imam, knows just 5 surahs, but he's the appointed Imam, and then Banu Hashim enter, someone from Bani Hashim, who leads the Salah? The appointed Imam. No one goes ahead of the appointed Imam. Even if the person knows better Quran than him, better recitation, no one goes and supersedes the Imam of the Masjid. The Prophet ﷺ says, وَلَا يَأُمَّنَّ الرَّجُلَ فِي سُلْطَانِهِ, that someone must not lead another man within in a place where he has authority. And the Imam in the Masjid, he's the one with the authority. Another thing, one case that is an exception is they say Al-Imam Al-A'zam. Al-Imam Al-A'zam is the leader of the Muslims in that country. Then if he comes into a masjid, then he is more worthy of leading. So let's say this Muslim country has a king. Yeah? The masjid has appointed imam. The king enters. Who's more worthy of imamah? The king. Or they say also Sahib al-Bayt. The person, this is his house. This is his house. Hafid al-Quran comes in. When Salah time came, Hafid al-Quran wanted to lead. We say no. The person who possesses the house is more worthy than leading. But let's say the king came to that man's house. The king or whatever it is. Today we have presidents and prime ministers. And then he says, وَلَا تَصِحُّ خَلْفَ فَاسِقٍ إِلَّا فِي جُمْعَةٍ وَعِيدٍ تَعَذَّرَ خَلْفَ غَيْرِهِ. The Hanabila, they say that al-imamat al-fasiq, the imamah of someone who is a fasiq, as in someone who commits major sins, or is persistent upon minor sins, or is public with his sins, then this person should not lead the salah. And if he leads the salah, the Hanabila say the salah is invalid. And the fisq is of two types. They say fisq amali, as in his fisq, his misguidance is in his actions. And they say fisq i'tiqadi, his misguidance is in his aqidah. So for example, he's from مثلا he's Sufi, or he's a mubtada' in general, from the Khawarij, whatever it is. They say he is a fasiq, not from the side of his amal. You might find him praying at night and crying when he recites Quran. But his fisq is fisq i'tiqadi. His fisq and his misguidance is that of i'tiqad. They say that his salah, praying behind him, is invalid. Their evidence for that is that Ibn Majah narrated that the Prophet ﷺ says, وَلَا يَأُمَّنَّ فَاجِرٌ مُؤْمِنًا. That a fajir, meaning someone misguided in his actions or his aqidah, shouldn't lead a believer. Shouldn't lead a believer. The jumhur, the majority say that the salah behind the fasiq is valid. They say that the salah behind the fasiq is valid. And their reasoning for that is many. Number one is that the action of the Sahaba. Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma, he prayed behind Al-Hajjaj. And Hajjaj was someone who killed Abdullah ibn Zubayr. He killed the Sahabi. And where did he kill him? In Mecca. And in what month? In one of the sacred months. After this, is there anything called... If he's not fasiq, then no one's fasiq. So, and despite that, Ibn Umar prayed behind him. Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, he used to pray behind one of the umara, I forgot his name, one of the leaders of this area. They say that he used to pray behind him even when he would come to Salat al-Fajr drunk. To the point that this Amir, this prince, or whatever he is, would lead Salat al-Fajr 4 rak'at. And Ibn Mas'ud didn't stop praying behind him. However, we say that if we have an option, we don't put the fasiq to lead the salah. If we have a fasiq and someone who's righteous, we don't put the fasiq first. And something which we spoke about in adhan, and we spoke about here, is that fisq includes also the person who shaves his beard. Shaves his beard completely. That is also fisq, because they say he's mujahir bil ma'asiyah. He's public with his sin. Therefore they say that, the Hanabila would say, that his salah behind him is invalid. And like we said, the jumhur, the majority say that the salah behind him is valid, but he shouldn't be put as an imam. But you came to the masjid, you found the imam is like that. Some countries, without naming names, some countries, all the imam are clean shave. All the imam. Where do you pray at that point? And that's why this opinion, from what I believe, is that it's not been acted upon. It's not been acted upon as an opinion. And it's hard to act upon. Because this person might be righteous in front of you, fasiq behind closed doors. You never know. Then he says, إِلَّا فِي جُمُعَةٍ وَعِيدٍ تَعَذَّرَ خَلْفَ غَيْرِهِ. The Hanabila, they say, you're not allowed to pray behind the fasiq. And salah behind him is invalid. They say, except in Jumu'ah and Eid, where you're not able to pray behind someone else. When we get to the chapter of Jumu'ah, we're going to know that you're only allowed to have one Jumu'ah in one village. In one village, you're only allowed one Jumu'ah, except if there are excuses, such as there's not space in the masjid, so on and so forth. So they say that if the only person in the village that is doing Jumu'ah is a fasiq, do you miss Jumu'ah because he's leading? They say no. In this case, they permit you to pray behind the fasiq, so that Jumu'ah doesn't, for that week, doesn't get cancelled, basically. Then he says, وَلَا إِمَامَةُ مَنْ حَدَثُهُ دَائِمٌ. Also, the imamah of someone whose hadath, meaning his minor impurity is constant. So for example, he has constant urine coming out, constantly, or constant najasa coming out. Then this person, his imamah, him being imam for people is invalid. But his salah for himself is valid. Then he says, وَأُمِّي. Also they say that the imamah of someone who is a ummi is invalid. And who is al-ummi? No, not in fiqh. In fiqh, al-ummi is something else. Otherwise, the Prophet ﷺ, is he not ummi? Huh? The Prophet ﷺ was imam for the whole period of his life. So the fuqaha, when they say ummi, they mean someone who cannot recite Fatiha properly. That's why he says وَأُمِّيٍّ وَهُوَ مَنْ لَا يُحْسِنُ الْفَاتِحَةِ أو يدغم فيها حرفا لا يضغم أو يلحن فيها لحنا يحيل المعنى. The person whose Fatiha, who has an incorrect recitation of Fatiha, then his imamah is invalid. And that is because, for multiple reasons. Number one, the Prophet ﷺ says that the one who doesn't the one who doesn't pray with Salah, with Surah Al-Fatiha, then that his Salah is invalid. The second thing is that we took last week that the recitation of the Imam is sufficient for the recitation of the Ma'mum. Therefore, if the Imam is reciting it incorrect, how can he now hold the responsibility of the rest of the Ma'mumin if he's reading it incorrect to himself? He says, أو يدغم فيها حرفا لا يدغم. He joins two letters which mustn't be joined. For example, he says, الحمد لله رب العالمين. He joined the two lams. That's إدغام ما لا يدغم. أو يلحن فيها لحنا يحيل المعنى. He makes a mistake which changes the meaning, such as him saying صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم, or instead of saying اهدنا, for example, he says أهدنا الصراط المستقيم, changes the meaning. Any mistake in the Fatiha which changes the meaning would make this person unworthy of imamah. Then he says إلا بمثله, except in the case that he leads someone who is like him. So we have two people who both can't recite Fatiha. Then we say that if one of them leads the Salah is valid. But if he leads someone who can recite Fatiha, then we say his imamah is invalid. طيب, now based on what we took from the Hanabila's position, that the fasiq cannot be an imam. This is a scenario where they say, if there are two fasiqs in the room, or three, who leads? the least fisq. How do they measure that? These guys. The Hanabila say that in this case none of them can pray behind any of the others, because each of them is a fasiq and none of their imamah is valid. So they say they should all pray by themselves. Then he says وَكَذَا مَنْ بِهِ سَلَسُ بَوْلٍ. We mentioned that someone who has constant urine coming out, then his imamah is invalid except for the person who is just like him. That's based on the opinion of the Hanabila. Obviously, because it's based on what they said. We're just building on what they've said. Otherwise, when we say that the imamah of the fasiq is valid, then they can pray together. The fact they're praying together, maybe we can say that there's improvement. Then he says وَعَاجِزٌ عَنْ رُكُوعٍ أَوْ سُجُودٍ أَوْ قُعُودٍ وَنَحْوِهَا أَوْ اجْتِنَابِ نَجَاسَةٍ أَوْ اسْتِقْبَالٍ. Okay, now we're going to mention briefly, the Hanabila, they have two cases for the imam being unable to do arkan. They say number one, he's unable to stand. He's unable to do rukn al-qiyam, standing. That's one case. Keep it to a side, it has its own ruling. The second is the imam is not able to do any of the other pillars. Like what? Sujood. We said qiyam is one case. This is another case. He's not able to do the rest. So sujood, for example, ruku', he's not able to do those. He's not able to sit between the tashahhud. That's the second case. With the first case, they say if the imam is unable to stand, then we still pray behind him. He prays sitting and we pray behind him sitting. We pray behind him sitting. As for the rest, they say we do not pray behind him. We don't pray behind him. If he's what? How's he by force? The person who can't do ruku'. Someone, sorry? No, we're not talking about fisq. We're talking about something else. You're talking about the last thing. The fasiq. Okay, so we're going back. If a fasiq is forced to be imam. Oh, he's pushing himself. Then you don't. The point is that if you see in yourself that you are more worthy than him, push yourself forward. Sometimes this is not. There's matters which you can't be shy in. If you know that the person you're pushing forward is a good person, he knows how to read Quran and stuff like that, push him. But if you know the person there, he's going to butcher Surah Al-Fatiha, then don't put him forward. You're risking your salah. If you know that you're more worthy than him, put yourself forward. And in this case, this case you shouldn't be shy. You don't say al-haya min al-iman in this case. No, your haya is going to make your salah invalid. Push yourself forward. Anyway, back to what we're speaking about. We said the imam has two cases where he's not able to establish a rukn, a pillar. Case number one, he's not able to stand. We say that he prays sitting, and those behind him pray sitting, even if they're able to stand. And this imam we're talking about is the appointed imam of the masjid. We're not talking about any imam. The imam of the masjid, unable to stand. We say he prays sitting, those who are behind him also pray sitting. The second case, he's not able to do ruku', he's not able to do sujood. The appointed imam. They say that, the Hanabila say you shouldn't pray behind him. He should delegate it to someone else. The second opinion is that if he's not able to do any rukn, then we pray behind him. We pray behind him, and the rukn which he's not able to do, he does it however much he can, and you pray behind him accordingly. Now coming back, he says, عاجز عن ركوع. He's not able to do ruku', the imam, or sujood, or qu'ud. He's not able to do any of these arkan. Or ijtinabi najasa. He's unable to remove a najasa of his body. Or istiqbal. He's not able to face the qibla. Then the imam behind him would be invalid. Do you understand what we said so far? He's not able to do any of these things, or one of these things, then his imam is invalid. Then he says, وَلَا عَاجِزٍ عَنْ قِيَامٍ بِقَادِرٍ إِلَّا رَاتِبًا. يعني الإمام الراتب رُجِيَ زَوَالُ عِلَّتِهِ. Except, he says, the case where the imam, the appointed imam of the masjid, is unable to stand, then you can pray behind him and sit behind him. Number one, he must be the appointed imam of the masjid. Number two, we must have hope that he's going to be cured. Not someone whose legs completely cut off. Is he going to stand again? High chance that he's not. Therefore, we're not talking about that. We're talking about someone who is unable to stand temporarily. Soon he's going to be able to stand again. Why did they say that we are allowed to pray behind the person, the imam, who's unable to stand? And we pray behind him sitting. Aisha radiallahu anha, she narrated that the Prophet ﷺ, she said, صلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في بيته وهو شاك فصلى جالسا. The Prophet ﷺ, when he was leading salah, he prayed sitting because of pain that he felt. فصلى جالسا. He prayed sitting. فصلى, Aisha says, فصلى وراءه قوم قياما. What does this show? Number one, it shows that the Imam al-Ratib, the appointed Imam, if he is unable to stand, he can pray sitting and he can still lead the salah. That's what it shows. What is it that shows? That the people behind him should sit. The Prophet ﷺ, he saw them standing. Aisha says, فَصَلَّى وَرَاءَهُ قَوْمٌ قِيَامًا. Behind him, some of them prayed standing. The Prophet ﷺ then gestured to them to sit down. And then he says, فَإِذَا صَلَّى جَالِسًا, يعني الإمام, he turned around to them after the salah, he said, فَإِذَا صَلَّى جَالِسًا فَصَلُّوا جُلُوسًا أَجْمَعُونَ. What does that show? That if the imam is unable to stand, then we are allowed to still pray behind him if he is sitting. Sitting behind the imam, is it wajib or mustahab? If he's sitting. Wajib or mustahab? He says mustahab, because he didn't invalidate the salah of those who stood behind him. He didn't invalidate the salah of those who stayed standing behind him. They mention here two cases. If the imam started the salah sitting, then the ma'moom is sunnah for him to start sitting. They say if he during the salah became unable to stand, he was standing, then he felt pain, he sat down, then it is wajib for the ma'moom to stay standing. It's wajib for the ma'moom to stay standing. Now the second opinion we said is that any pillar that he's unable to establish, we pray behind him. He's still allowed to lead. According to the book, no. If he's unable to do ruku' or sujood, that's it. He cannot lead the salah. Moving on, he says, وَلَا مُمَيِّزٍ لِبَالِغٍ فِي فَرْضٍ. Another thing is al-mumayyiz, someone who is 7 years old and has not yet reached the age of puberty, then he is not allowed to lead someone who is an adolescent if it is a fard. Dhuhr, asr. He's not allowed to lead it so long as he is not a baligh. He's not of age of puberty. However, they say it's valid if he leads another child like him. 2 7-year-olds, one of them is leading the other, then it's valid. They say this, the reason they said this, one of the reasons they say that for the child it's going to be a nafilah, and for the person praying behind him it's a fard. And for them, you can't pray a fard behind someone who's leading a nafilah. That's one of the reasons. When you come to the hadith, there's a hadith of Amr ibn Salama, who was young, a 7-year-old, and he mentioned that I used to lead my people in salah. Imam Ahmad, he narrated this hadith himself. Why didn't he take it as evidence? They say that he, as they said تردد فيه. He didn't say that it's weak, but he was reluctant in taking it as an evidence. And he said لعل هذا كان في أول الإسلام. He said perhaps this might have been in the beginning of Islam. But he wasn't confident 100% to take the hadith. But when you see the hadith and that is authentic, you would say that the salah of the mumayyiz for the baligh is valid. The salah of the young child leading the grown up in salah, that is valid based on this hadith. Some others said because he was the only one able to recite, the others weren't able to recite. Allahu Akbar. Then he says وَلَمْرَأَةٍ لِرِجَالٍ وَخَنَاثًا. Another case where the imam is not allowed is for a woman to lead a man. If a woman was to lead a man, then we say that the imam is invalid. The reason is the Prophet ﷺ, he says لا يفلح قوم ولوا أمورهم امرأة. That a people will not succeed if they make a woman their imam, whether it is imam in salah or imam as in general, as in she's the leader of the country. So, however, we don't want to go too deep into the tafsir of the hadith. Some ulama, they said that he was speaking about that specific case. Allahu Akbar. And then he says وَخَنَاثًا. Did we speak about al-khuntha in the first few lessons? This doesn't exist anymore, but this is a case where a child is born and we're unable to distinguish the gender. We're unable to distinguish the gender. Now this person could be a man, could be a woman. If he leads the salah, there's a chance that it's a woman leading men in prayer. Does that make sense? Yeah, there is. But it's rare. As in, these people, some of them, they could be born with both organs. But it's very rare now. What gender do we say they are? Whatever side they lean to more. If they're more masculine, then we say it's a man. If it's more feminine, then we say it's a woman. I know it's hard to depict because you've never seen it. But it exists. So this case, this person is not allowed to be an imam for men, because it's a case where it might be a woman, therefore she might be leading men in salah. And as for the woman, can a woman lead this person, al-khuntha? No, because the chance is a man. And we say her imam of a potential man is also invalid. Then he says وَلَا خَلْفَ مُحْدِثٍ أَوْ نَجِسٍ فَإِنْ جَهِلَ حَتَّى انْقَضَتْ صَحَّتْ لِمَأْمُومٍ. Then he says that it is invalid to pray behind someone who is upon hadith, someone who doesn't have wudu, or is upon najasa. He has impurity on his thawb, on his clothes, or in his body. Then he says فَإِنْ جَهِلَ حَتَّى انْقَضَتْ. If they are both ignorant of that until the salah has now ended. Example, I am praying behind Muhammad. Yeah? When the salah ended, I find out that he didn't have wudu. That's one case. In this case, we say my salah is valid, his salah is invalid. The case number 2, we both know that he does not have wudu. We both know. He knows and I know. We say both of our salah is invalid. The third case is that I know and he doesn't know. Then again, both our salah is invalid. How many cases? 3. Case number 1, he knows, I don't know. Whose salah is invalid? His. And mine is valid. Second case, we both know. Whose salah is invalid? Both. The third case is that he knows, sorry, did we say that already? We both don't know. I'm lost. I know and he doesn't know. Then we say the salah is valid for me. Valid for me only. Yeah, it's invalid. That's it. Another thing is if the jama'ah is big, the imam is unaware that he doesn't have, he's aware that he doesn't have wudu. Then we say his salah is invalid, the jama'ah is valid. Let's say he's unaware, he doesn't know that he doesn't have wudu, he doesn't know. And within the jama'ah, some know that he is upon wudu, some know he's not upon wudu. Then we say all the jama'ah, the salah is invalid. The next case is that all of them don't know. Then we say all of their salah is valid, the imam's salah is invalid. It's all clear, right? We can move. Then he says, وَتُكْرَهُ. Now he's going to mention imam of some people that is makruh. He says, لَحَّان. Number 1, someone who makes a lot of mistakes in pronunciation or in recitation. So he pronounces huruf wrong. Or he changes the meaning with his mistakes. Then he says, وَفَأْفَائٍ. Fa' is someone who stutters when it comes to the harf al-fa'. When it comes to the letter fa', he stutters. And this exists. Also with the letter ta as well. Some people, whenever they get to ta, they start to stutter. Then this person, his imam is makruh. Then he says, and there's others as well. They say, tukrah imamat al-a'ma, the blind person, his imam is makruha, because he potentially would miss if there is najasa in front of him. Someone who is able to recite Fatiha but makes mistakes that doesn't change the meaning, his imam is also makruha. They mention about 8 or so. Then they say وَسُنَّةُ وُقُوفٍ. Now he's going to speak about the positions and how to stand and the sunnah in that. Then he says وَسُنَّةُ وُقُوفُ الْمَأْمُومِينَ خَلْفَ الْإِمَامِ. The sunnah is that the jama'ah pray behind the imam, and that the imam is in the middle, whilst the jama'ah make rows behind him. Then he says, and that's because hadith Anas radiallahu anhu, where he says that the Prophet ﷺ came to his grandma and he wanted to pray. He said, قُومُوا لِأُصَلِّي لَكُمْ. Then he says, فَصَفَفْتُ أَنَا وَالْيَتِيمُ وَرَاءَهُ وَالْعَجُوزُ مِنْ وَرَائِنَا. That the Prophet ﷺ led Anas ibn Malik in salah in his house. And he said, again, this is another evidence that what? That the leader, when it comes to the house, he's more worthy of imam. He says that me and the yatim, some people named him, that they prayed behind the Prophet ﷺ as a row, and behind them, the grandma, his grandma prayed behind. Then he says, وَالْوَاحِدُ. If there is one ma'moom, the jama'ah is 2 people, meaning there's one imam, there's one ma'moom. He stands on the right side of the imam wujuban, and it's wajib, because there's nowhere else that he can stand. If he stands to his left, we say that is invalid, and if he stands behind him, it's invalid, for 2 separate reasons, 2 separate hadith. Then he says, وَالْمَرْأَةُ خَلْفَهُ نَدْبًا. If there is a man and a woman, it's sunnah for the woman to stand behind the man, because of the hadith that we just took. Then he says, وَمَنْ صَلَّى عَنْ يَسَارِ الْإِمَامِ مَعَ خُلُوِّ يَمِينِهِ أَوْ فَذًّا رَكَعَةً لَمْ تَصِحَّ صَلَاتُهُ. Now we have the cases where it's invalid in terms of where you stand. If you have an imam and his right side there is no one, so I'm praying, I'm leading salah, on my right side there's no one, it's invalid if the person comes and stands on my left side. His salah would be invalid. The reason for that is that Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, he says, بِتُّ عِنْدَ خَالَتِي مَيْمُونَةٍ. He said that he slept the night at Maymuna's house. Who's Maymuna? The wife of the Prophet ﷺ. How is Maymuna related to Ibn Abbas? his maternal auntie. She's also an auntie of someone else. Maymuna, the auntie of Khalid bin Walid. Anyway, that makes Khalid bin Walid and Ibn Abbas what? Cousins. Ibn Abbas says that he slept the night at Maymuna radiallahu anha's house. And then he says, فقام النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يصلي من الليل فصففت عن يساره فأخذ برأسي فأقامني عن يمينه. Ibn Abbas, he joined the Prophet ﷺ in prayer whilst the Prophet ﷺ was going to pray at night. And he said, I joined him and I stood to his left side. And the Prophet ﷺ then took the ear of the Prophet of Ibn Abbas and he brought him to his right side. They took from that standing on the left side of the Imam makes the Salah invalid. And then he says, أو فذًا ركعة. Another thing that makes the Salah invalid is if you stand behind the row by yourself. So you have a row, complete row, or the Imam is by himself, you stand behind him by yourself, then that makes your Salah invalid. The reason the Prophet ﷺ says, لا صلاة لفذ خلف الصف, that there is no Salah for the singular person behind a row. And then he says also, when he saw a man praying like that, in such a way, he came to him and he said to him, استقبل صلاتك. He said to him, pray again. They took from that invalidates the Salah. Now, they said that him praying singularly by himself should be a rak'ah or more. Then it becomes invalid. Anything less than a rak'ah, it doesn't become invalid. The reason for this as well is that they said the hadith of Abi Bakr al-Thaqafi radiallahu anhu, when he entered the masjid and he joined in ruku' and he walked all the way to the row. Until he got to the row, he was by himself. So they said that is because it's less than a rak'ah. So that's how they brought between the evidences. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he has a middle opinion. He says if the row is full and there is nowhere for you to join, then he says that in that case it becomes allowed for you to pray by yourself. But if there is a gap, you should fill that gap first. Then he says, وَإِذَا جَمَعَهُمَا. Now he's going to speak about some of the rulings of following the Imam within the masjid or from outside the masjid. He says, وَإِذَا جَمَعَهُمَا مَسْجِدٌ. Now, if the Imam and whoever wants to pray behind him are both in the masjid, they're both in the masjid. He said, صَحَّتِ الْقُدْوَةُ مُطْلَقًا بِشَرْطِ الْعِلْمِ بِانْتِقَالَاتِ الْإِمَامِ. If I'm in the masjid and the Imam is in the masjid, we're both in the masjid, and I'm not outside the masjid, the rows haven't reached outside the masjid, what are the conditions for me to be able to join him in prayer? They say only one condition: for you to be able to know his movements, meaning that you can hear him. That's the only condition. So it's not a condition for you to see him if you're in the masjid. So let's say we're in the masjid and someone is praying behind this pillar. He can't see the Imam, but he knows his movements. Or the women are praying in the other section. They can't see the Imam, but they can hear his movements. Also, if there's an upper floor, they're within the masjid. So all they need is to be able to hear the Imam. That's it. However, if he's outside the masjid, then we add one more condition. For him to be able to see the Imam or see those who can see the Imam. So for example, let's say now the rows have reached outside the masjid. Then we say the condition is those people outside the masjid, they should be able to see the Imam or see someone who can see the Imam. This occurs a lot in Masjid al-Haram. Masjid al-Haram, sometimes the rows reach all the way outside in Ramadan and stuff like that. But those people, do we say, no, you're outside the masjid, your salah is invalid? No, because they can see, those who can see the Imam. But one other mistake is that even when it's not full, you see people praying from their hotels. From their hotels all the way. I'm not talking about the hotels attached to the Haram. I'm talking about the ones you walk down the road. They can't see the Imam or anyone that can see the Imam. Therefore, we'd say that their salah is invalid in that case. Another thing is if the rows are connected, meaning the rows are connected till it reaches outside the masjid. Then we say the salah of those outside the masjid is also valid. Then he says, وَكُرِهَ عُلُوُّ إِمَامٍ عَلَى مَأْمُومٍ ذِرَاعٍ فَأَكْثَرٍ وصلاته في محراب يمنع مشاهدته وتطوعه موضع المكتوبة وإطالته الاستقبال بعد السلام. Some of the makruhat, some of the things which are disliked, is for him to be above those who he's praying, those who he's leading, by an arm's length or more. And the reason for that is the Prophet ﷺ prevented from that. And there was a time where Salman, I think radiallahu anh, he led the people in salah and he was standing on a step. And then one of the Sahaba had told him after the salah, and then he agreed with him that he was wrong for that action. But we don't say it's haram, we say it's makruh. Then he said, وَصَلَاتُهُ فِي مِحْرَابٍ يَمْنَعُ مُشَاهَدَتَهُ. For him to pray in a mihrab which prevents the ma'mumeen from seeing him. And that leads to another thing, that the mihrab shouldn't be something crazy, fancy, massive, that prevents those who are praying behind him from seeing him. Then he says, وَتَطَوُّعُهُ مَوْضِعَ الْمَكْتُوبَةِ. For him to pray sunnah, the imam, as soon as he finishes salah, for him to pray sunnah in the position in which he led in. They said because that could confuse the people that are praying behind him. Then he says, وَإِطَالَتُهُ الْإِسْتِقْبَالِ بَعْدَ السَّلَامِ. For him to face the qibla, now he's finished the salah, for him to face the qibla for a long time after the salah. Because the sunnah is for those who are praying behind him to wait for the imam to turn around, then they can leave. That's the sunnah. So him now facing the qibla for a long amount of time, he's making it difficult for those behind him. Someone who wants to apply the sunnah, he is still waiting for the imam to turn around. So the sunnah is that the imam, as soon as he finishes the salah, and he says astaghfirullah 3 times, and he says Allahumma anta salam, he finishes that dua, he turns around. He turns around. Then he says وَوُقُوفُ مَأْمُومٍ بَيْنَ سَوَارٍ تَقْطَعُ الصُّفُوفَ عُرْفًا. Another thing which is makruh is for the ma'mumeen, those praying behind the imam, to make a row in a line in which there is a pillar that breaks their row, such as this one. This, if they were to make a row here, then we say that they make a row in the row behind the pillar, because the pillar is going to break the saf. Except if there is a need, such as Jum'ah. Jum'ah, the place gets tight, we need to use that space. He says, إِلَّا لِحَاجَةٍ فِي الْكُلِّ. Except if there is a need. And we take the principle again that a makruh is no longer makruh if you are in need of doing it. If you are in need of doing it. Such as this case. If we're in need of praying in that row, we need to use that space. Do we say it's makruh? No, we say it's no longer makruh. Then he says, وَحُضُورُ مَسْجِدٍ وَجَمَاعَةٍ لِمَنْ رَائِحَتُهُ كَرِيهَةٌ مِنْ بَصَلٍ أَوْ نَحْوِهِ. Another thing which is makruh is for someone to attend the jama'ah whilst they have just eaten onions or garlic, or they have a bad smell in general. Whether it's from those two or anything else. They say it's makruh for him to attend the masjid or the jama'ah. The Prophet ﷺ said, مَنْ أَكَلَ ثُومًا أَوْ بَصَّلًا فَلْيَعْتَزِلْنَا وَلْيَعْتَزِلْ مَسْجِدَنَا وَلْيَقْعُدْ فِي بَيْتِهِ فَإِنَّ الْمَلَائِكَةَ تَتَأَذَّى مِمَّا يَتَأَذَّى مِنْهُ بَنُو آدَمَ. Prophet ﷺ says, whoever eats onions or garlic, then let him stay away from our masjid and let him pray in his house. For the malaika, the angels, are hurt by that which Banu Adam get hurt from. I think Al-Hajjawi Al-Iqna' he says that it's makruh for you to attend any gathering, if you know that you smell bad or you have eaten something which would make your odor a bit distinct. You should avoid. And he says, وَيُعْذَرُ. He's going to speak about those who are permitted and have the permit to not attend Jumu'ah or Jama'ah. The two. He says, وَيُعْذَرُ بِتَرْكِ جُمُعَةٍ وَجَمَاعَةٍ مَرِيضٍ. Number one, the first person who's excused from not attending the Jama'ah is someone who is ill. Now, not any illness. Some people, the slightest illness, he calls everything off. We say that the illness is that which, if he attends the masjid, then him attending the masjid will make him more ill. For example, the journey to the masjid makes him in need of walking, and walking would increase his illness. Then we say to him, you can stay at home. Or he fears that if he goes to the masjid, that him being cured from his illness would now take longer. So for example, he was going to become okay in 1 week, but if he goes to the masjid, it's going to make that longer. Then we say he's also allowed to pray at home. Then he says, وَمُدَافِعُ أَحَدِ الْأَخْبَثَيْنِ. Someone who is desperate for the toilet. Then we say he is excused from not attending the Jama'ah and Jumu'ah. He does what he needs to do first, then comes. If he finds that Jumu'ah is over, then we say, you're not sinful. The Prophet ﷺ says, لا صلاة بحضرة طعام ولا وهو يدافعه الأخبثان. And then he says, ومن بحضرة طعام يحتاج إليه. Someone who is hungry and sees food which he is in need of. Meaning, we're not saying there's food there but he's full. No, there's food there and he's in need of the food. He's hungry. That case we say he is allowed to miss the jama'ah. And this sunnah is forgotten when? This sunnah is forgotten a lot in Ramadan. In Ramadan, most people they rush to the salah, and in his head, the iftar that is at home. We say eat till you get full, not till you get full, but till you get that sufficient amount, and then go to salah. And I'm not making an attack on anyone, but as I'm saying, masajid in general, they should look out for this. Meaning give the people in Ramadan enough time. Because now when he attends the masjid, he's thinking about samosa at home, he's thinking about rice, biryani, all of this. And his salah is in Ramadan especially. Then he says, وَخَائِفٌ. And the evidence for that we mentioned, لَا صَلَاةَ بِحَضْرَةِ طَعَامٍ. Prophet ﷺ says that there is no salah whilst the food is present, وَلَا وَهُوَ يُدَافِعُهُ الْأَخْبَثَانِ. And neither if he is desperate to go to the toilet. Then he says, وَخَائِفٌ ضَيَاعَ مَالِهِ. Someone who is afraid that if he goes to the Jum'ah or Jama'ah, that some of his wealth is at risk. For example, he fears that something is going to get stolen at home if he goes to the masjid. Or for example, he realized the door of his house doesn't lock. And if he goes to the masjid, he leaves the house at risk. Then we say in this case you're allowed to leave off the Jama'ah. Then he says, أَوْ مَوْتَ قَرِيبِهِ. He's afraid that if he goes to the masjid, that he's going to miss the death of a close one. Meaning, when someone's about to die, you can tell that he's in his last moments. They say in this case, do you go to the masjid or do you stay with that person? They say you're allowed to leave off the jama'ah to stay with that person. They say that Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma, it was Jumu'ah, and he heard that his wife was about to pass away. Therefore he left Jumu'ah to stay with his wife in her final moments. Then he says, أَوْ ضَرَرًا مِنْ سُلْطَانٍ. This person is afraid that if he goes to the masjid, that the ruler is going to oppress him. And we say that this is only in the case that if the ruler is an oppressor. But let's say that he's a criminal. He's afraid to go to the masjid because he's going to get arrested. We say that's not an udhr. The excuse that you're allowed to leave off jama'ah is if you are innocent, and if you go to the masjid, you fear that the ruler might oppress you. Then he says, أَوْ مَطَرٍ وَنَحْوِهِ. Another thing is if there is rain. And the rain is not any light rain. We're talking about a rain which is heavy. To the point that if you were to bring your clothes and squeeze it apart, then water would soak out. Then he says, وَنَحْوِهِ. And like it, such as strong wind or snow. These things also make it permissible for one to leave the Jumu'ah or the Jama'ah. He says, أَوْ مُلَازَمَةَ غَرِيمٍ لَا وَفَاءَ لَهُ. He's afraid that if he goes to the masjid, that he owes someone in that masjid money, and he doesn't have the money to pay him back. Then they say that's a valid excuse. But this is not in the case that he has money to pay him back, but he doesn't pay him back. We say no, there's no excuse, because he should pay him back. Another thing they say is that if he is asking for his money back before the time they agreed, someone said, pay me back in January, and the person changed his mind, he said, no, I want it in November. Then in this case, if he knows that he's going to pester him, he can leave off that jama'ah. The Prophet ﷺ says, مَطْرُ الْغَنِيِّ ظُلْمٌ. That the person who is able to pay back his debt and doesn't, the Prophet ﷺ calls that dhulm. That is dhulm. However, let's say the person doesn't have money. He genuinely doesn't have money to pay you back. Are you allowed to ask him for the money? Huh? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِن كَانَ ذُو عُسْرَةٍ فَنَظِرَةٌ إِلَى مَيْسَرَةٍ. That you must leave him until he's able and he has money again, then you ask him. But so long as he genuinely doesn't have money, he has nowhere to get it from, then you leave him. Then he says, أَوْ فَوْتَ رُفْقَتِهِ. The person is afraid that if he goes to the Jama'ah or Jumu'ah that the people he's traveling with will leave him. Can that happen today? I remember. Your flight, but the person here, he'd rather go to the masjid. In this case, you're allowed to leave of the jama'ah if you fear that the people you're going with are going to leave. Then he says, يُصَلِّ الْمَرِيض. Now he's going to speak about Salat Ahl al-A'dhar, the Salah of the people who have certain conditions. He says, يُصَلِّ الْمَرِيضُ قَائِمًا. The person who is ill, we say to him to pray standing. We don't tell him straight away, oh, you're sick, pray sitting. No, so long as you're able to stand, you pray standing. The Hanabila are even strict with this. They say that يُصَلِّ الْمَرِيضُ قَائِمًا وَلَوْ بِأُجْرَةٍ. وَلَوْ بِأُجْرَةٍ. They say even if he pays someone to help him stay standing. If he's able to pay that much, for example, per salah, he says, I'll pay you £5. If he's able, then they say that's wajib for him to get someone who can help him stay standing. Yeah, someone helps him to stay standing. What does that show you? That the rukn of qiyam is not a joke. Some people, the slightest pain, he prays sitting. No, but in this case we say that she doesn't have anyone to help her and she's unable to stand without the stick. It's different. I've never heard of this hadith. When you find it, send it. Anyway, that shows you that you don't take the rukn of standing leniently. If you cannot, you can only sit if you are categorically unable to stand. That's it. The Prophet ﷺ says, صَلِّ قَائِمًا, pray standing. Then he says, فَإِن لَمْ تَسْتَطِعْ فَقَاعِدًا. If you're not able, then sit down. Now let's say the person, he's unable to stand. Totally he's unable to stand. Or standing would bring him difficulty. Would bring him some sort of difficulty, then he can pray sitting. Then he says, فَإِن لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَقَاعِدًا. If he's unable to stand, then he prays sitting. How does he sit? When he is sitting in behalf of qiyam. Where else is he going to say? Oh no, that's not what I'm talking about. He sits cross-legged, just like the Prophet said. Cross-legged is the sunnah. If he's unable, then he sits any other way. Just like in salah. Salah, there's a sunnah. How do you sit in salah? With your right foot planted on the ground and the other one. But if he was to sit cross-legged in salah, salah valid or invalid? Huh? Valid. Then he says, فَإِن لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَعَلَى جَنْبٍ. If he's unable to pray sitting, then he prays laying down on one of his sides. Whether it's his right side or his left side. Both is allowed. But they say that the right side is better. Because of the general evidences which came to show that the right is better than the left. Then he says, وَكُرِهَ مُسْتَلْقِيًا. They say it's makruh for him to lay flat on his back and pray if he's unable to sit. They say it's better for him to pray on one of his two sides, and if he's unable, then he moves on to laying on his back. They said reason because his feet would face the qibla. Then he says, وَإِلَّا تَعَيَّنْ. Let's say he's not able to lean on his left or right side. Then we say you pray laying flat on your back. Then he says, وَيُومِئُ بِرُكُوعٍ وَسُجُودٍ وَيَجْعَلُهُ أَخْفَض. How does he now do ruku' and sujood if he's laying down? Before we get there, someone who's praying sitting, does he do ruku' and sujood? He's praying sitting because he's unable to stand. Does he do ruku' and sujood? Yes, because he's able. Let's say someone is not able to do sujood because he has pain in his head. Does he have to do sujood with the other 6 parts? So he comes all the way and his head just stays a bit above. Huh? No, they say that if he is unable to do it with his head, then he doesn't have to do it with any of the other parts. Because they say al-maqsood min as-sujood. The whole point of sujood is for your head to be on the floor. If your head is not on the floor, then it's not called sujood anymore. طيب, now how does the person who's laying on his side do ruku' and sujood? They say that he puts his head down for ruku' and even more down for sujood. Then he says, فَإِنْ عَجَزَ, if he's unable to move his head, he's unable to move his head, how does he do ruku' and sujood? They say with his eyes. And that is mufradat al-Hanabila. The Hanabila, they have salah with the eyes. They say that for ruku', for qiyam, he opens his eyes fully. Like this. For ruku', he closes them a bit. And for sujood, he closes the eyes. Then when he wants to stand up again, he opens the eyes. That's how they said that he should pray. There's no dalil for this from what I know. Then they say, أومأ بطرفه فإن عجز أومأ بطرفه ونوى بقلبه كأسير خائف. If he's unable, like we said, to move his head, then he does it with his eyes, and he intends in his heart what action he's on. So he knows now that he's on ruku', now he's on sujood, and so on and so forth. He said كأسير خائف, just like someone who is captive and he's afraid that if they see him praying that they would harm him. Then we don't say to him, pray even if you know they're going to harm you. We say to him, pray according to what your ability. Then he says, فَإِنْ عَجَزَ, if he's unable to even move his eyes now, he says, فَبِقَلْبِهِ, he prays with his heart. With his heart. Whatever position he's in, he intends with his heart that he's in ruku'. He intends with his heart that he's in sujood. And if he's unable to utter the adhkar, then he also intends it in his heart. But if he's able to utter them, but he's unable to move, then we say, no, you utter those adhkar, such as the Fatiha, the tasbih, you say them, but you do the af'al in your heart. You do the actions as if you intend for each one in your heart. But if he's unable to do both, then he does both in his heart. مستحضر القول والفعل فإن عجز فبقلبه مستحضر القول والفعل. Then he says ولا يسقط فعلها ما دام العقل ثابتا. This is what we all took before, that if he can't stand, he sits. If he doesn't sit, he prays laying down. If he can't pray laying down, and he does ruku' and sujood with his head. If he can't, then with his eyes. If he can't, then in his heart. What does this show about salah? Very important, that you can't miss it. There's no excuse for you to miss it. Even the captive who's afraid that he will be harmed, that if he leaves salah he might be that he might be killed, even him salah is wajib. Yes, the how of that salah might be different. Maybe he can't pray it fully, but he must establish that salah. And you can't say dhuhr came in and came out and my excuse is such and such. There's no excuse. There is no excuse to miss a salah so long as you have aql, so long as your brain is with you. That's it. Salah is wajib. To the point the Prophet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it wajib in the time which there is most fear, which is battle. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ فَرِجَالًا أَوْ رُكْبَانًا. That if you're afraid, then you pray whilst you're fighting, رِجَالًا, on your feet, أَوْ رُكْبَانًا, or whilst you're on your horse. You pray according to your ability. Salat al-khawf. There is a whole salah for a time in which there is fear. We don't say, oh no, salah, no, we're in battle, let's continue next day. Even on that, the times of fear, salah is still wajib. Salah is still wajib. So if you have an excuse for missing salah, just know your excuse is not valid. It's not valid. Then he says, فَإِن طَرَأَ عَجْزٌ أَوْ قُدْرَةٌ فِي أَثْنَائِهَا انْتَقَلَ وَبَنَى. Someone during salah, he started his salah unable to stand. So he started praying sitting. Then he felt like all of a sudden he's able to stand. We say it is wajib for him to now stand. It's wajib for him to stand. And if someone started his salah standing, but during the salah he felt an inability to continue standing, then he's allowed to sit down and he continues as normal. So he doesn't make up the rak'ah, he continues as normal. And with this they mention a mas'ala, which is, if someone is able to pray standing at home, he's able to pray standing at home by himself. But if he goes to the masjid with the jama'ah, he's able to pray sitting, but he can't pray standing. Do you understand? At home, he can pray standing. He can pray standing, but by himself. If he goes to the masjid, he's only able to pray sitting. One of them, he's praying sitting, so he's left off a rukn of standing. One of them, he's prayed at home by himself and he's missed the jama'ah. We said jama'ah is wajib. Do you understand what's going on? So which one does he put forward? He puts forward the rukn, because the rukn is higher than the wajib. So he prays at home by himself rather than going to the jama'ah. But this is, it's not wajib for him to do that. We say it's better for him to pray by himself at home standing rather than going to the jama'ah where he prays sitting. Because they said the rukn goes and precedes the wajib. Wallahu a'lam. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Yes. What is it? Oh, is there any questions? If someone prays the salah with Surah Al-Fatiha, and in Surah Al-Fatiha he does not apply the rules of tajweed, then we say that the salah is valid. The salah is valid. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad.